IVM.
We would like to thank Storytel for sponsoring this show. Storytel is an audiobook platform that lets you hear hundreds of thousands of stories on your mobile, on your PC, wherever you prefer. You can get a great deal by signing up at storytel.com/IVM. But before I tell you what the deal is, let me make a recommendation for you for your first book. When you go to Storytel, search for James Clavell. He has a number of books, but I'm going to recommend Shogun to you. Shogun is the story of an Englishman who's shipwrecked in 16th century Japan and how he struggles to deal with the culture, gets embroiled in the politics of the land. It's a great story, and if it wasn't enough that you can get just this one book, James Clavell's Asian Saga has 5 more books on Storytel. So go to storytel.com/IVM. You can get your first month at 99 rupees a month instead of 299. That's 200 rupees off on your first month. Storytel.com/IVM. Go check it out.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. Almost as though the India-Australia series ended, we needed a little bit of a break, and now we are back, and it is Test match season all over again. Varun is joining me from Singapore. DJ is joining me from England. I'm your host, Ashwin, for the week. We're obviously very excited. Test match fever continues to run at an all-time high. Varun, at the time of recording this, 5 days away from the India versus England first Test match. Are you excited? Do you still have that level of energy? I know DJ feels like he's a little drained after the Australia series.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we were all a little drained. It took some time. Even when we recorded the podcast at the end of the day, I could feel our energy was low. And then as the podcast went on, our energy kind of levels went up again. So I think drained, yes, but that's all in the past, right? That's the way cricket works. You always look forward to the next assignment, as Ajinkya Rahane said in a recent interview. So 4 days to go, there's been a lull. Things have been very quiet, and so looking forward to Friday morning.
DJ, it feels like social media is just picking back up. Rishabh Pant making jokes about needing to buy a house. Ben Stokes landing in Chennai, posting pictures. Jofra Archer training on a field in Chennai, running around barefoot. Like, is it starting to build back up for you? Are you there yet?
It's building back up slowly. I'm glad we've had this break. As you guys pointed out, I was totally drained. The emotion of the Australia tour I'm still feeling it almost. I mean, we've got that hangover, right? It's like we've had this amazing victory, and I'm almost worried that the next series might not live up to the drama of the previous series. I hope it does. But just an incredible series, and looking forward to India-England. We needed this break, to be totally honest. It allows you to savor that win and then look forward to the next series, which should be a big one.
Yeah, really well said. So for this episode today, we're going to be previewing the India-England series and the first test in particular. We'll talk a little about the squads. And then in the second half, stay tuned. We have a great guest chat with a cricket writer who's also sort of like us, has a full-time corporate world gig, but is a cricket writer on the side. So stay tuned. We will talk more about that at the end of this first half. But I want to spend the rest of this first half of the show with you gentlemen talking about the India-England first test match. So Varun, let me come to you first, right? We're going to talk about the squads. We'll go in order, etc. But quite a few big changes, right? If I'm trying to summarize the changes, obviously a couple of people missed out. Natarajan misses out, didn't get a call back into the side. Then you have some injuries with Jadeja, Shami, Vihari, and Umesh all missing out. But then you have some positive news where Virat has come back into the side. Ishant has come back into the side. So before we get into the details of it, overall, how are you feeling about India's squad going into 4 tests against England?
I mean, I think it's good. We talked about India and India A. So I think the India side is showing up against England. And I think it's going to be good. And I do want to say, I think Virat Kohli had way too much FOMO. So I think he's going to come out with a bang. He's going to want to spend as much time in the middle. And I personally think it'll be a good series because England, across all formats, is, according to me, one of the best teams right now.
DJ, you live in England, obviously. You're closer to probably tracking the ins and outs of England cricket. I don't think there's anybody who can doubt they're one of the top limited over sides in the world, right? ODI, they're the World Cup champions, T20s as well. Do you rank them as highly as an all-format side as Varun seemed to do?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, the honest truth is England focused a lot after the 2015 World Cup on the limited over side of things. That's been a super success for them. I mean, they've set all sorts of records. They've blazed a trail on most Owen Morgan's team. That has come to some extent at the expense of the test game and their test batsmanship, particularly at home as well, because we talk about India winning at home. I mean, it's a given. Australia usually was very, very strong at home. Most teams seem to win at home. England, though, have lost test matches at home. You had the 2-2 series, Ashes series last year. India challenged them at home as well. So England haven't looked that strong as a test side at home. They have been winning in Sri Lanka. Right, and I want to talk about that. They won their last 2 series in Sri Lanka. And I don't know whether that's a mark of a decline of Sri Lankan cricket, because they used to be very, very strong earlier, or the rise of England cricket and their ability to play spin. Now, this series will be a real test of England's credentials as a test team. And I'm sure we're going to talk more and more and dig deep into that. But I think this series will actually tell us where the England test team stands. They've got some different players. They've got players like Crawley, Sibley, people who don't play the white ball game as much, with a mix of people who play all formats like Joss Butler for some of the tests, Johnny Bairstow for some of the tests. So it's going to be very interesting to see where England lie on the test spectrum. Of course, they're right at the top of the they're in contention for a shot at that Lord's final in the World Test Championship. So on paper, yes, one of the stronger teams. Whether they are as strong as the England teams of the past, which have beaten India in the last decade, I'm not so sure, particularly because of the spin strength.
Varun, let me come to you. Let's talk about Team India for a quick second. A lot of faces, like I said, missing out because of injury. Prithvi Shaw, I think, is the one name that I think was unfair, harsh on the young guy.
No, I think it's completely fair. They didn't play him in Australia after the first test. He didn't look comfortable at all. And honestly, the way Shubman Gill stepped up, I think zero doubt in anyone's mind that Gill had to be in the squad instead of Shaw.
Interesting. So is it your prediction then for the India openers that they stay consistent with Australia, even at India? So Rohit and Gill?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, Rohit is a monster at home in all formats and tests especially. And so just jumping the gun a little bit, I believe the top 5 is set. I don't think there's going to be any question in Rohit, Gill, Pujara, Virat and Rahane. I think that's the top 5. The squad seems to indicate that as well. All form seems to indicate that. And you've got a good balance between attacking, defensive, test batsmen. So I think that's going to be India's top 5.
I think I would agree with you there. So we can spend time talking about the rest of them. DJ, really quickly, any disagreement on the top 5? Does Mayank find a way into this top 5 for you?
Not really. It's tough, given he scored a double 100, right, in the South Africa series as well. It's tough, and he's such a hardworking cricketer. I'm a big fan of Mayank. I'm sure he'll find his way back somehow, but I think he's a backup opener for this series, in honesty. So Gill and Rohit up top, and can't disagree with Varun on the top 5, but that's when it gets interesting, right?
Yeah, so let's get there then. Top 5, I think you have unanimous agreement from the 3 hosts of this show. Varun, number 6. I almost don't even need to ask you, but Pant versus Saha question?
It's interesting, man. Look, I think Pant has done enough to warrant the place in the side as a batsman. I think the risk in India is that you play your keeper at number 6. You typically don't need more batting than that. And that's why it's sad, because Vihari, for all the blows he takes overseas and all the balls he faces time out there in the middle, the next series is usually in India. And Vihari doesn't play, even though he's part of the squad. So I think that's why Indian cricket at home becomes a little bit tricky. And it's also tricky because, there's a lot of talk about the wicket spinning. You're needing a specialist wicket keeper. Saha himself has come out and said that, I think a couple of things. Firstly, he talks very highly of Pant. I think he does train Pant in the nets and stuff like that. If you look at the Australia match, the ending of the match, I think the biggest hug given to Pant was actually by Saha. So it's interesting dynamics there. But Saha has also then come out and said a wicket keeper's job in Test cricket is that of a specialist. And he believes that it should stay that way. So Saha probably knows he's got a year or two maximum left in cricket. The fact that Dhoni retired early from Tests gave him that little bit of runway. But to me personally, not just as a Rishabh Pant fan, I think that debate is slowly getting over and we're going to see Rishabh play.
DJ, yes or no, Rishabh at 6?
I would say yes. I mean, if you're not going to give the boy a shot now, when are you ever going to play him, right? He's high on confidence. And to tell the truth, I would rather you play him at home, and if he drops a couple of catches, so be it. Indian bowlers at home, the spinners create enough chances for us to win the game, even if 1 or 2 catches go down. And I'm hoping they don't. But this is when you give Pant that run at home and give him the confidence to say that you are a number 1 keeper. You've done well in Australia. You've done well in England. we're not just going to throw you at the deep end when we tour. We're going to give you a proper run at home when the wickets are good to bat on, and you can improve on your skills as a keeper. And I think that is the message the team really has to send our boy Rishabh Pant. His stock is at an all-time high, just like GameStop at the moment. So let's hope it goes only one way, and that's up.
And I couldn't agree more. I think I'm in agreement. And I think we've talked about Rishabh in the opposite sense, by the way, when about being a momentum player and a confidence player. And when things are down, he found it very hard to find his way back up. So the opposite applies too. You have to believe a guy who's helped his team draw in Sydney, helped his team win at the Gabba for the first time in 30 plus years. The momentum and the confidence is at an all-time high. I couldn't agree more. We have to capitalize on it. Varun, let me just ask you one more thing about keepers, because this is an argument I've had with my friends many a times. How much is a drop catch potentially worth? Like if you try to quantify it, right? So say for the sake of argument, a drop catch is worth an extra 30 runs that player puts up. And so if Rishabh drops 3 more catches than Saha, does he need to make 90 more runs than Saha would make to net be better? Or is it not that simple? Am I trying to oversimplify a complicated equation?
Yeah, I don't think it's that simple, but we have seen that when you drop a Labuschagne or you drop a Smith, they make you pay for it. So on average, I would love to see what that stat is worth. I think somebody did show it in the Australia series. My gut feel was also going to be 25 to 30 runs, but I don't think it works exactly in that format, because there are many different factors to this, right? We saw in the I think in the MCG test, Rishabh Pant coming out there increased Rahane's strike rate. We saw in the Sydney test, he was able to up the scoring to be able to defend the test. And in the Gabba, he was able to win them the match. So it's not as simple as that. I think India will have to live with a few dropped catches for a while he gets better, but I still believe it's the right decision.
Yeah, really well said. I think that's what a lot of these guys are trying to do with Cricket for the smart stats and, Ben Jones and CricViz and stuff to analyze the numbers a lot of different ways. But what is Rishabh's impact outside of his own, let's say, average and strike rate? So, all right, I think we've talked numbers 1 through 6. DJ, let me ask you for number 7. In the squad, we have a few different potential contenders. We have a Hardik Pandya. We have Washington Sundar. You have Akshar Patel. You could play somebody like an Ashwin at 7. And then you have let's go with it. Then you have batsmen like Rahul and Mayank who haven't slotted in the first 6. But who's your pick for number 7?
So this is going to be really interesting, right? So it depends on how many all-rounders we play, how many bowlers we're looking to play, what the pitch does. Now, historically, the Chennai pitch has been one that's spun. It's taken spin. We remember the heartbreak against Pakistan when Saklane and India was playing. Sachin hit the ball up in the air and Wasim Akram took that catch. And we also remember the genius of Sachin scoring 155 against Australia in the first test. We remember India winning the 2001 series in Chennai, Harbhajan Singh squeezing it past point. We remember Dhoni scoring 224 against Nathan Lyon. But this is all the basic premise on which all of this is based is that Chennai takes spin. Interestingly, the curator is a first-time curator who's never curated he's a businessman, an entrepreneur who's never curated a first-class pitch. He has his own academy. So he says that it's got an English look to it. There's a great article by Cricinfo which says it's got an English look to it. It'll have something in for the quicks on day 1 and 2. Then batting will be good on days end of days 2 and 3, and then it'll take spin days 4 and 5. So I think our combination will be decided by what the pitch looks like. If it's going to play, if it's going to favor the quicks, I think Hardik Pandya gets a look in. If there's more spin involved, then either Akshar or Washington Sundar play kind of in that Jadeja holding role, so to speak. But of course, Ashwin walks in and then you've got the quicks.
So very interesting. I think good insights on the pitch as well. Varun, I guess what DJ's net is saying, you can't really talk about 7 without talking 8 through 11. So why don't you just walk me through who are your picks for, let's call it 7 through 11. So 1 all-rounder and 4 bowlers, 2 all-rounders and 3 bowlers. How do you think, and I guess begs the question, is Ashwin still an all-rounder in your mind or is he a bowler?
I think it comes down to the overall balance. And I think given the success in Australia, I think India is going to go towards playing a non-Ashwin all-rounder at number 7. That's the easiest way for me to articulate that. And my gut feel is that it's going to be Washington Sundar, kind of to give him that confidence that, hey, you've done well and you deserve it, you keep going. The challenge for me is if Ashwin is going to play at number 8, which is pretty much guaranteed, then do Washington Sundar and Ashwin bowl a very similar line? And is that going to be challenging? So ideally, I would love to see Kuldeep there. I think Akshar, it's maybe a bit early, especially in the first test against England, to just hand him a debut. So I'm going to go with Sundar and Ashwin as the 2 spinners, although I would love to see Kuldeep. And I think from a fast bowling perspective, there's going to be 3, right? I think it'll be Bumrah, it'll probably be Siraj, and I think one out of Ishant Sharma and Shardul Thakur, which for me, I guess, Ishant Sharma being the incumbent, which is the argument we had at the start of the Australia series for Prithvi Shaw as well.
That's really interesting because I think I have a very different take on that. I think for me, your 4 bowlers at 8, 9, 10, 11, for me, are going to be Ashwin and Kuldeep. I think they've sort of tried it to be public that they want to give Kuldeep a shot. It was harsh on him to sit in the dressing room and not get a chance. So Ashwin and Kuldeep are your 2 spinners. I think you play Bumrah and then one of Ishant or Siraj. I would love to see Siraj get a look, but also can't take it away from Ishant that he was just unfit. So those are your 4 bowlers. You've got 2 pure quicks, 2 pure spinners who are both full-time spinners and different styles. And so the question for me becomes number 7, do you give a look into a Hardik because the pitch is doing more for quicks, or do you give a look into a Sundar because it's doing more for spinner? And let's remember Chennai is Sundar's home ground. So that's the question for me.
No, it's very fair. I think I should have clarified and said my assumption is Hardik is not going to bowl a lot of overs. So even if Hardik bowls, if Hardik's giving you 5 overs in 5 days, that's not enough. And Virat Kohli came out very clearly and said Hardik is part of the test plan, but we want him to be bowling a certain number of overs because that's when his value in the team becomes priceless. So if Hardik is coming in as a batsman who's going to bowl 5 overs per innings, it's just not worth it for me. And that's why my team balance is a little bit different.
Interesting. DJ, what about you? Where's your head out of this?
So I think Hardik, if he isn't bowling, doesn't bat at 7 for me, just because it just throws the balance off too much. I'd rather have a Mayank batting at 6 and then push Pant down to 7, because Mayank is a great player of spin bowling. He's got a double 100, as we spoke about. He's got runs. So for me, if we are playing the combination you spoke about, it becomes extremely interesting because you saw the English batsman struggle against the left-arm spin of Embuldunia, if I'm getting his name right? They've struggled against Herat, they've struggled against this guy Embuldunia, and he had their number. So for me, I almost think that it would be worth having a like-for-like swap with Akshar Patel, almost coming in exactly for Jadeja, because he's as close as you can get to Jadeja, right? Washington Sundar, of course, he's done very well, but the question comes back to what Varun said. He's so similar to what Ashwin does. And of course, you've got there's so many variables because you've got these great left-handers in the English team like Ben Stokes, and you want to take the ball away from them. Kuldeep, does he play? It's all up in the air, but to my mind, it comes down to what the pitch is going to do and whether Hardik can bowl. If he can't bowl, he doesn't play for me. And then that leaves the question whether it's Akshar or it's Washington Sundar who's going to come in and take that number 7 slot. And I think Kuldeep and Ashwin should play. And I think Ishant plays and Bumrah plays. So I think I'm on your side with that. The dark horse in all of this obviously is Shardul Thakur, because he's shown he can bat. And if we are playing only 2 frontline quicks, so to speak, in Bumrah and Ishant, does he then come in because he can bowl that seam enough overs, he can bowl 10 overs a day, and he can bat a little bit at the number 7 spot. So all combinations are open. Of course, Shastri and Kohli, what they do at the end of the day, only they know. So I guess we'll wait to find out.
Yeah, I think really well said. So as we think about Team India, just to summarize then, unanimous agreement from all 3 of us on the top 6, 0 agreement on the next 5. And I think that's an interesting story. That's been the tale of the series against Australia. Despite winning comprehensively in Australia, a record-breaking historic win, we are still sitting here 4 days out from the match with no clarity on what our starting 11 is going to be. And that's the joy of being an Indian cricket fan. So with that, I want to quickly talk a little bit about Team England before we wrap up this first half with some predictions. Varun, let me come to you first. I don't know how closely you followed the Sri Lanka series. We're not going to go through all 11 for Team England, but a couple of folks who I would highlight. Joe Root seems to have found found his hands, to use Steve Smith's language, but seems to have found form, right? Are we nervous about Joe Root coming to India off of the back of this kind of form? Because it does feel like this whole conversation about Fab 4 with Smith, Kohli, Root and Williamson became about Fab 3, where Root was falling out, and now he's just played magnificently in Sri Lanka. So what are your thoughts on Joe Root coming to India?
Yeah, I think Joe Root is a great batsman, and I've always, I think ever since Kevin Peterson days, I've always been scared about English batsmen batting long against India. So I personally, I do like Joe Root. I don't know his statistics. I think he plays spin extremely well. But for me, the bigger worry, and I think that's why we were all having that debate about India's bowlers, is that my gut feel tells me you're going to pick up 2-3 quick wickets against England. But then if you get stuck into Butler, Stokes, Moeen Ali, Wokes, Foakes, maybe, it's never ending, right? I mean, I looked at the squad, Ashwin, and Sam Curran doesn't seem to be there. So that gives me a lot of hope. But imagine if you add Sam Curran to the list of 5 names that I just said. Suddenly you feel like if your Bumrah, Ishant and Ashwin are tired after bowling total 50 overs, then England is just going to come and bat it out, right? They're going to make a lot of runs against tired bowlers. So I think that's a little bit of a worry for me.
Yeah, DJ, let me ask you quickly again. So there's been some controversy about it, right? Bairstow played against Sri Lanka, not playing against India, potentially to save his fitness and health for the limited overs and then the IPL as well. Moeen Ali has come into the squad. Ben Stokes has come into the squad. I almost think they're shoo-ins to the 11s even. So England's middle order, right? Do they have more strength in the all-round abilities? I guess if you think of Wokes as an all-rounder, and then Stokes and Moeen as well, does that give them more options for batters who can bowl as well?
I mean, one of the great things about the England side, both in the limited overs game as well as the test game, is their all-round ability. You've got this endless assembly line of all-rounders who would walk into any test side in the world, right? I mean, even someone like Chris Wokes is overshadowed by a Ben Stokes. So their strength really does lie in that 4, 5, 6, 7 almost, I would say. But they won't have great memories of Chennai. Remember Karun Nair? He scored 300 here last time they were here. I mean, it's going to come down to the pitches, man. I mean, and I hate to say this, maybe sounding a little bit controversial and a bit negative, but we're also pumped about the Australia win. If you think about it, the quality of cricket was probably not as high as it was made out to be. I mean, there were 50 catches dropped across both sides. The sides let go of a lot of winning positions where a more clinical side would have probably just come through and closed off the game. So, yes, we're all on a high from India winning. It almost feels like those 90s wins where you come from nowhere and win it. But my question is, did India... There are still issues for India to look at, right? And this England side could expose them. So I would really see how the first few tests go. And one of the things that will play into England's favour is that there are 2 tests at each of the venues. It isn't like you're jumping from Delhi to Visakhapatnam to Wankhede to Chepauk, right? You're playing 2 tests at Chennai and then you're playing 2 tests at Ahmedabad. So they'll get a chance to get used to the conditions. They'll get used to the pace of life in those cities. There's not that hectic travel schedule which teams struggle with in India. So, I mean, after 2012, probably their best shot at winning a test match in India. I'm not saying the series, but a test match.
Okay, so we'll come to predictions in a second. Varun, my last question about Team England. Broad, Anderson, and Archer. 3 top quality test match quick bowlers. Do they all get a look in the same match? Or at least in the first 2 matches in Chennai?
I mean, if the Australian tour has taught us anything from Australia's perspective, it's that you need to give your bowlers a bit of a rest. And I think that's ultimately what DJ was kind of alluding to as well. The quality of cricket may not have been that up to the mark. Mitchell Starc, one of the greatest bowlers in the world, was falling flat at the Gabba. And so I think I think England is going to be wary that this is a long tour. There are bio bubbles, there are quarantines. It's not that easy to get people into India, into Chennai. And so as a result of that, I don't think all 3 will play. I think 2 out of 3 will play. I think given age and fitness, Archer is probably going to be the constant. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's one match you see maybe even Archer that doesn't play, because it's very important for them to get through this entire series with their 3 best quick bowlers doing well.
Yeah, very well said. So just like with Team India, it seems like Team England has some selection question marks as well, but obviously in both cases in a good way with lots of good options and just needing to choose who makes the first 11. So we always do this. before we wrap up, DJ, I'll ask with you first. 4 tests, 2 at Chennai, 2 at Ahmedabad. Your prediction for the series scoreline. Just the number. No explanation, no justification.
3-0 to India.
Varun.
3-0, I was going to say. So I'm going to say 3-1 then to make it fun.
I was going to say 3-1. I'll say 2-1 to make it fun. 2-1 to India with 1 draw. So that's it, guys. That's exciting stuff. India-England Test Series kicks off soon. Limited overs to follow. We will be talking about the result of the first match by the time we're with you next. We have a great interview lined up in the second half. DJ, before we go to break, do you want to do a quick announcement of the winner of our last giveaway?
Oh, yeah. So thanks, guys, for sending in all those amazing entries to the last week's giveaway, Dr. Ramchandra Guha's book, The Commonwealth of Cricket. We'd asked you the question on the last podcast, why is cricket the most subtle and sophisticated game known to humankind? We got some really great answers. So thank you, guys, for sending those in. And I did the draw a little while ago. I did it live. And the winner of the book giveaway by HarperCollins India is Piyush Gupta. So congratulations, Piyush Gupta, aka Peter Gate on Twitter. So well done, man. That was really, really well done. I'll just read out what his entry said. Peter Gate 19 writes, the honesty and integrity of Ram Guha and his love for the game shines through. I too love the game, but struggle sometimes with looking past my own team. If you love the game, you need to appreciate the beauty in all teams. Well said, Piyush, and congratulations again on winning the previous week's giveaway. We have a giveaway on this week as well. Similar format, similar concept. We ask you a question in the second half of the show. So you just need to give us the answer to that question and tweet the link to the show. Those are the 2 easy steps in which to do it. And back to you, Ashwin.
Thank you very much. So we'll be right back after the short break with an exciting interview.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and LinkedIn too, for that matter. And we've been putting up some content on LinkedIn, so do check that out. I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Storytel and The Whole Truth Foods. Thank you for supporting us. So, great week on the network again this week. Definitely do check out the Pragati podcast. Pavan spoke to Krish Ashok. They discussed science, knowledge, and the wonder of Indian home cooking. Staying in the realm of food, on This Round Is On Me, we had A.D. Singh as a guest. Gauri and A.D. discussed the 10 years anniversary of The Table and the 20-year anniversary of Olive. So 2 of Bombay's biggest restaurateurs have a conversation about the restaurant business. All Things Policy celebrated 500 episodes on January 27th. Manoj talks to Aditya and Anirudh about the surprising origins of the podcast, its evolution over the last few years, and its exciting future. This episode also marks their video debut, so definitely do check that out on YouTube. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet talks to Ranjit Pratap Singh. Ranjit is the co-founder and CEO of Pratilipi. Pratilipi is a company that's recently acquired IVM, and Ranjit on this episode discusses his plans to build a homegrown media empire, his love for comics, and how India can have its own comic cinematic universe. And finally, Cyrus had an exciting week. We had some amazing guests this week. We had Vishal Gondal come and talk about Fauji. We had Atish Tathir talk about the various issues that he had been facing with his OCI card and other things like that. We had Adam Dow talk about things going on in the US and the evolution of what's happening there. We had Siddharth Kannan come and talk about his history with Cyrus and his new show. So definitely do come check that out as well. And with that, let me take you back to your show.
Welcome back to the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. We're delighted to have a very special guest join us for the second half of this show. If you are anywhere on social media or have been following cricket or India cricket in particular for the last few years, you will know him and have hopefully heard of and read his books. I'm delighted to be joined by Anindya Dutta. Anindya, thanks for joining us from Singapore. I know you're in my time zones are in the opposite part of the world, so it's evening for you as it's morning for me. Tell us a little bit about your background and story with cricket. And the reason, our listeners know DJ, Varun, and myself we all have day jobs, we all work in the corporate world and just are so passionate about the sport that we started Edges and Sledges on the side. And we've been doing this 3 years now. But tell us a little bit about your journey as somebody who, like us, was in the corporate or is in the corporate world and is a fan of cricket.
Well, first, thanks very much for having me on the show. I'm a big fan of your show, so it's nice to be on it. And following Ram Guha, I guess, is a big shoes to fill. So, like you said, all of us have a similar journey in the sense that we've got corporate backgrounds and we're also passionate about the sport. So I was a banker for about 27 years based in Bombay, in Singapore, London, Hong Kong, all over the place. I was running teams everywhere, and I was a trader essentially. I started on the foreign exchange floor. Somewhere along that journey, I saw my first cricket match when I was 7 years old, way before you guys were born, at the Eden Gardens, India, West Indies, 1974-75. That always stayed in my mind because it was the era of the spin quartet. Watching the first day of the match, watching Bishan Bedi, Prasanna, Chandra bowl, of course, makes a great impression in your mind. And then that was a series when Vivian Richards debuted. So it's and Andy Roberts as well, if I remember. So it was a very, very special series in that sense. Fast forward many years, and I've been following cricket, but not really doing much about it, if you like. And then about 6-7 years ago, one day I decided to write an article on cricket history, just for the heck of it. And I sent it off to an Aussie site. It got published. So there were two ways to look at it. One was they published crap, and the other was that it was a half-decent piece. It could have gone either way, honestly. And then a couple of days later, I got a mail from the editor saying that one of the writers who I'd admired for a very long time, Kersi Meher Homji, wanted to speak to me. And I said, okay, give him my number. And then we spoke, and he's a very, very nice gentleman. He'd written 14 books by that time. He picked up, I think this was my second article on the website. And then he picked it up and he said, there's a book in it. And I said, but this is a 1,000-word article. How can I write a book on it? And he said, trust me, I've written 14 of them. There's a book in it. So that eventually, a few years later, became Spellbinding Spells, which happened to be my second book. And that sort of got me going because the whole research into the sport and the obsession with getting it right, and the stats figures thing came obviously from all our backgrounds in the corporate world. So you just learn to put things into boxes and be systematic about how you do how you look at numbers. So that all of that sort of played in together, and that's how the journey started.
That's fantastic. And the one thing in particular I wanted to say is that story of you being 7 years old and seeing those influential cricketers, and it shapes you. And we've told the story on the podcast before, but if I may just for you, Varun, who's my brother, and I, our first cricketing memory is we were vacationing in England in 1996 and got to go see the test match at Lord's in June. And there was these two new guys
Dravid and Ganguly,
who exactly. Who at that age we didn't know that much about. We weren't following domestic cricket or anything, but we got to see Dravid and Ganguly. Ganguly made 131, Dravid made 95. And I mean, arguably being there at the ground for that is what made us so passionate about cricket, 25 years later. So it's very interesting to see what that first experience is like. But I want to particularly pick, so again, one of the things we talk about on this podcast that a lot of our fans relate to is, many of us don't still live in India. And of course, you're in Singapore now. I'm in the US. So the Australia series for me, some matches started at 6 p.m. The day-night test started at 10 p.m. And so for that week, no sleep, but it was all worth it in hindsight. But tell me about some of your favorite, if I can put you on the spot, some of your favorite experiences or memories of being a cricket fan in a different time zone who, had wanted to follow the game despite it not being practical.
When I was in the US, that was a very long time ago as a student, and there was no way I could access live cricket at that point in time. So I leave that aside because honestly, for those 4 years, I think I lost track of a lot of things that were going on in cricket. Fortunately, I think the early 90s were nothing that I could, I have regrets about missing at this point in time other than probably Tendulkar's early career. But thereafter, 2001, the Calcutta test that I distinctly remember being in Hong Kong at work. I mean, in terms of the time zone, it started at lunchtime, right? I can tell you I didn't do much work those last 3 days. So even when I speak to Lakshman now and I do some work with him, and I just keep telling him that it's just, it influences, it sort of shapes how you look at the sport, that kind of a match. So that's something that I will always remember. And this Australia series was amazing. I mean, I heard the discussion you guys had with Ram Guha on 1971 versus first this one. I don't know if you know, but I'm probably the only one who's written a book on the 1971 tours. It's called The Greatest Year.
Oh, wow.
So that came out in August last year as an ebook. So you'll get it on Amazon. It's called The Greatest Year, and it talks about the West Indies and the England tours. I don't believe it's ever been written before on those tours.
So let me ask you, I want to deep dive in the Australia series a little bit later, but just yes or no, was the 1971 series greater than this series that just happened? Do you agree with? Okay. As an authority who's written a book on it, I feel like I'll take your point of view. But we'll come back to that.
But it's, I say no, but it was one of the pivoting points of Indian cricket. That's for sure. And I mean, you look at just spend a minute on that. If you look at the percentage of wins that India had before that versus what happened thereafter, and the psychological impact that kind of a win in the West Indies, and it wasn't only England, because Ram was talking mainly about England, but it was West Indies a few months before that, and England thereafter, which completely changed the way Test cricket was perceived in India, because India could win. You talk about Sena countries now. I hate the term. I absolutely hate the term. But that's a popular term to use now. But if you think,
and why do you hate it? Do you hate the lumping or just?
Yeah, I just hate the lumping because it's just completely different surfaces, completely different conditions, and people in my mind just lump them together because it's the lazy thing to do, home and away.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. And then very conveniently, they don't include Sri Lanka, West Indies in there because they don't want to. So I just think it's a very, very badly termed thing, but it's just come into the lexicon, if you like. But just going back to 71, I think why I say that this one was probably better than 71 was the West Indies series was won because of one test match. England series was won because of one test match. In both cases, they were won because of one single bowler. The decisive one. So it was Salim Durrani who took 2 wickets in Port of Spain, which won us that West Indies Test match and the series. And it was Chandrasekhar's 6 wickets at the Oval, which won us the batting is fine, but decisive spells. Whereas what happened in Australia now, I think is quite different, right? I mean, we all agree that there was a lot more going into that.
So let's talk about that then, right? As we think about this Australia series, I think recency bias is a thing, so I'll acknowledge that. But I don't remember watching a series that was as thrilling and to your point, I think well articulated, that was as reliant on not just all 11, but almost all 20 guys in the squad to deliver this result. Is that an aspect of what made this past series so special? Is that you can't single-handedly point at a Gavaskar or a Sachin or a Durrani or in more recent years a Kohli or somebody where everybody had to step up, and is that what a team sport is made of?
Absolutely. I mean, India played Test cricket 1932, right? First time. So you've got this whole journey here. I think over the last few years is the first time you can call the team a real high-performance team. Because it's been, stops and starts in the past. But if you look at, I guess if you can divide it up into pre-Ganguly, post-Ganguly, I mean, that's really the defining moment of an upward trajectory of Indian cricket. I mean, it's obviously not been smooth all the way, but that's the upward trajectory. And given that, what you see today, what happened in Australia, I think it's in a way maybe an inflection point, which shows that the team has come of age. That a 36 all out, which again, you see the hilarious podcasts. I say hilarious, but it's very incisive as well, that Ashwin's doing at the moment. And when he talks about it with, I think Vikram Rathore, the one, and he's talking about the 36 all out being what, coming from a banking or financial industry, I would call even a Six Sigma event. Okay. And I wrote a piece the next day in First Post about Kohli flying home alone. Right? That essentially said that this is one-off and you cannot judge the team on the basis of this particular innings which happened within an hour. And Vikram Rathore was saying exactly the same thing. So, that happened, and then for the team to recognize that and to deal with it and move forward, because you make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? But what does a really good team do? It learns from those mistakes and it tries not to make the same mistakes again, right? And that's what I think as a team they did after that.
So if I had to ask you to pick, and I'm going to ask you a little bit more about spin after, but if I had to ask you to pick your favorite moment of that 4-test series, what would you highlight? Hopefully not the 36 all over. But maybe that's what led us here. Right?
I think no Indian would tell you that was a favorite moment, right?
Sure.
I would say Vihari and Ashwin batting. I mean, it was just incredible. There have been a few instances of great bravery in Indian cricket, right? And that stands right at and somehow Australia's been the place where a few of them have taken place. I mean, the 1981 Melbourne 1981, which I write about in my book Wizards as well. Dilip Doshi with a fractured instep, Kapil Dev with a torn thigh muscle, Shivlal Yadav with a fractured toe going in there, and Karsan Ghavri was the only bowler who was not injured, and he bowled brilliantly. And they won the match for India against probably one of the greatest Australian teams of all time. That and this particular thing where Vihari and Ashwin showed the courage to stand up and do that, for me, two of the greatest instances of where India went on to win. I mean, then you've got 76, Sabina Park, where, the way they had to declare because everyone was in hospital. That's a different level altogether.
Or Kumble bowling with a cast on his, a plaster on his jaw as well. That was pretty amazing.
So this is going to be maybe a bit controversial, but I don't personally hold the Kumble spell very high among the list of courageous things. Yes, it was a courageous thing to do, but why I don't hold it high is because India didn't need him to bowl. It wasn't a make or break situation at that point. Yes, it would be good. It would be good if some wickets fell, and he took Lara to his credit, which is incredibly difficult imagine bowling with a broken jaw in there. But India wasn't going to win or lose the match whether Kumble bowled or not there, honestly. Which is, I think, the big difference between what happened in Australia and what happened in 81 Melbourne.
Very interesting. And I think you could say that for Vihari and Ashwin, which you talked about. You could say that for Pujara.
Absolutely.
In Brisbane. You could say for all of these guys, they all came down to knocks or spells that defined.
Yeah, and Pujara, I mean, the first two times he got hit in that innings, I don't know if you remember, he stopped looking at the ball because, you just, I guess, momentarily lose your ability to withstand it, right? And couple of times he got very badly hit, and he could have been, injured far worse during that time. And then he got his composure back, and then he started just taking them on his body again. That was just such a fantastic display of grit.
It really was. Couldn't articulate it any better than that. DJ, let me ask you. I haven't asked you much on this show yet, and I want to come to talk a little bit about spin. But let's talk about Ashwin, right? Anindya mentioned him, obviously, in the context of the YouTube series he's been doing. But arguably going into this series, there's been a lot of into the Australia series, there's been a lot of conversation about how he's an India bowler. He should play more at home, shouldn't play as much away. We've talked about him not always in the most positive light as well. But, maybe you could say in the first three tests, he really stood up and helped deliver the results for the team, right? So do you think Ashwin has turned a corner as a spin bowler overseas?
I think in the first two tests, most definitely. I think he started to struggle in the third test. He didn't bowl that well in the third innings of the third test. And he sat out the last test with injury again. And it goes back to that point about fitness and whether he's going to be able to carry through the tour. And I mean, unfortunately, he's not completed another tour. His bowling has, I think there's a Jared Kimber article on this and how it's really hard to be an off spinner in Australia. And then the very next day, he wrote an article about how Ashwin, since 2015, I think, has changed his method and has his average has dropped, because I think we started the tour with an average of 48, or something that's not befitting a bowler of his stature. But to put it in context, he outbowled Nathan Lyon by a lot. So I think it goes back to how you see his role. Is he going to be a wicket-taking bowler? I think the answer to that has always got to be yes. He's not going to be a stock bowler because you've got people like Jadeja to do that in the team. For me, the more interesting question is, where does this leave Kuldeep? Right. And I mean, I'd love Anindya's thoughts on this, because before the last tour, he was our number one spinner, our number one overseas spinner, as declared by Ravi Shastri. So where does Ashwin's performance, Jadeja's batting leave Kuldeep Yadav? And you've spoken a lot about how spinners have been treated in your book over the years. And is this just another example of a wrist spinner being treated a little bit differently by the management?
Okay, just step back for a moment to talk about Ashwin. I think, to be fair to Ashwin, because when I wrote Wizards and I wrote this chapter on Ashwin, I tried to be as fair as possible because, none of this had happened by at that point in time, and his records were not as good as well. But the issue also for an off-spinner bowling in Australia is that you have to remember that an Indian off-spinner going and bowling in Australia bowls with a different ball. And it's not that easy to grip the kookaburra and get the kind of drift and get the kind of spin that Ashwin would get with the ball in India. To his credit, last year he bowled better, if you recall, in England as well than he had done before. You remember those dismissals of Alistair Cook, right?
Yeah.
And that was because he had practiced with the Duke ball. So I think that's a factor that people miss, that he's been putting in a lot of work with the different balls being used for those places. And that, with his experience, this was his third tour in Australia and third or fourth tour of Australia. And
I think it's fourth one. Yeah.
And so I think he had figured out by now, especially with all the pressure on him, of course, I mean, everybody's saying the same thing, right? On what to do this time. And I think he outbowled Nathan Lyon. I mean, it's very clear. The reason also may have been that the Indian batsmen were better prepared to face Lyon, so he looked less effective. But to come back to your point on Kuldeep, now I'm the biggest fan of Kuldeep. Okay, I absolutely love him to death. I think he is the future of Indian spin bowling, and he's come along in leaps and bounds. I don't even think he should be playing T20 cricket. But then if he didn't play T20 cricket going the way he is in terms of being selected, he wouldn't be playing any cricket. So for me, he should be walking into the Indian side every time India plays two spinners. Because, he's different, right? You've got a wrist spinner and you've got a left arm wrist spinner. How many countries have the luxury of having a left arm wrist spinner of the quality that we have in Kuldeep? And if you don't use him now, when are you going to use him? I know spinners mature late, right? But the kid's been bowling well for a while. And he's what now? He must be 26, something like that.
He's 26, yeah.
Yeah, he's getting to that stage where he's just going to get better and better. And if you don't give him playing opportunities now, when are you going to give it to him? I mean, I would, if I was picking an 11 for the Chennai Test, I would put Kuldeep in there along with Ashwin.
So is that your first two picks for two spinners if we play? Is it Ashwin and Kuldeep?
Absolutely.
So you leave Jadeja out? Okay.
Jadeja, I don't think is in the team for the.
No, I just meant in general. Where you said when we play two spinners, that's your first.
I would take Kuldeep and Ashwin.
Got it. So very interesting, and obviously your recent book Wizards talks a lot about spin and the history of Indian spin and the journey we've been on. But as we think about having wrapped up a great win in Australia, the team's now travelled home. We're ready to play England in just over a week's time. Let's talk about kind of the role of spin in India compared to Australia, right? So obviously you said you'd play Kuldeep. Who are your kind of first choice spinners to play in India? And would you play two spinners? Do you play three? How do you think of team composition and the role of spin when playing? And India's broad. Let's start with Chennai, say.
I don't think I'd play three because, the Indian pitches have completely changed, right? I mean, we know that. When was the last time you saw a really bad pitch which helped spinners? It was probably against South Africa in 2017, something like that, 16, 17.
I think we had one at Nagpur, didn't we, where Kohli left a straight one that Australian left armer took like 8 wickets, or Steve O'Keefe.
Steve O'Keefe, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Pune,
probably
maybe. Nagpur. Or maybe Pune. Sorry,
Pune.
Not Nagpur.
It was a really bad pitch.
A bad name.
Really bad pitch, yeah.
Yeah, and Bangalore took spin as well, quite a lot of it, the next test. So
but it wasn't, the Bangalore, it wasn't flying all over the place, right? So yes, it was a turning pitch, but Pune was diabolical, absolutely. But other than those, Indian pitches generally in the past few years, for good reason, right? I mean, you've got, as we saw in Australia, you've got, we were picking our 9th choice pace bowler. So, I mean, when you have a pace bowling attack like that, you're not going to make spinning tracks. It doesn't make sense, right?
So let me ask you that then.
Yeah.
And has India turned a corner then where, again, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s even, it was a spinning nation, right? You had great batsmen and you had great spinners. A good quick bowler was a diamond in the rough. They came by occasionally. You would maybe have one or two, but I could think of many years where if our top two, forget 4 or 5, our top 2 quick bowlers got injured and the quality would drop drastically.
Of course.
Has India turned a corner now where the depth of our pace reserves have come a long way? And what do you think drove that change, if that's true?
Well, I think we've probably got more pace reserves than any test team in the world right now. I include, Australia, I include England, South Africa, anyone. Depth, I don't think exists in those teams. Maybe it's because of the population, as they would like to keep pointing out. But again, as one of the Aussie players said the other day, in the end, you've got to have 11 world-class players, no matter what your population is. So it's not a probabilistic game, right? As we know from India and the Olympics. I think we have a great depth in pace bowling. And what changed in that, what caused it? It's a very interesting point because it's obviously not grown overnight. You've had this whole period and Kapil Dev, Jamagal Srinath, they started that, Zahir Khan came and Irfan Pathan and the whole lot. So it's been a transition. But I think what has happened is it's accelerated again, like I was talking earlier about the performance of the Indian cricket team as a whole. It's accelerated significantly under Kohli. So you've had, from Dhoni's time, you've had the fast bowlers come in, you had Shami come in, Ishant was there, etc. But if you look at pre-2015 numbers for these bowlers versus post-2015 numbers and how they've been, the number of overs they've been bowling, the number of wickets that they've been taking, it's very clear that the captain has a great role to play in this. And, if you go back to the spin history, spin came about because 1962, a 21-year-old Patauti takes over. He finds that India is unable to get 20 opposition wickets, right? That was the basis for his bringing in the spinners and throwing out all the medium pacers and saying, they're useless because they don't take wickets. So why can't I have 4 spinners? I mean, it's just completely different mentality. I think Kohli's somehow done the same thing for pace, which might be the reason why he has less faith in spin than pace, as opposed to the previous captains. But it's a strategy. It's, and you have to say that it's paid off in terms of Bumrah's come in after Kohli came. But the rest, if you look at the numbers, they're stunning. I mean, you look at Shami's numbers, the averages are down by 10 runs, right? And all of them are the same. So that really shows the faith that the team management puts on the kind of bowlers. That's my view.
Yeah, I mean, very, very well said. So if we think about the upcoming India-England series, we talk a lot about batting, etc., and the batting orders and the batting lineup. But let's talk about the bowlers, right? As you think about England's quick bowling lineup, essentially, their top 3 picks were probably Broad, Anderson, and Archer. Yep. On paper, formidable, right? Absolutely formidable. But having taken down a side with Stark, Cummins, and Hazelwood, the India fans are probably at an all-time high with confidence. But I want to ask you about Dom Bess and Jack Leach, 2 spinners in the squad. They both played in England's recent series against Sri Lanka. They have neither has ever played in India before, had played Test cricket in India before. Yeah. How do you rank those 2 bowlers, and do you think they have what it takes to contribute to taking 20 Indian wickets in India?
The side itself, yes, can definitely take 20 Indian wickets. It's a very good side. We can't underestimate them. I know we don't want to talk about the batting here, but Joe Root's in unbelievable form. He's back in form after a very, very long, bad patch. And interestingly, if you look at Joe Root's record, England have never lost a test match where he scored a century.
Wow. I don't think I'd seen that statistic.
Go and check it out. I think he's got like 14 centuries and England's never lost and hasn't lost a single test match when he scored a century. So, people who are expecting England to roll over in this series, I think are going to be very disappointed. And the issue today is that you don't see too many draws, as we know, right? And we don't know how Ahmedabad is going to behave because it's a completely new stadium, completely new pitch. We have absolutely no idea what it's going to look like. So there's probably going to be a result in every test match, and there's unlikely at this time of the year that it's going to rain. I'm not sure how that's going to pan out, but I just wanted to mention that about Root. So India's got to figure out a way to get Root early. Now, in terms of Dom Bess, I like Dom Bess personally. I've seen him bowl in county a bit. I've seen him in the last England summer bowl. He didn't bowl particularly well in Sri Lanka, I have to say. I mean, the Sri Lanka outfit was, not really. It's sort of, Sri Lankans won't like hearing this, but I know my Sri Lankan friends are very, very upset with the way their teams played. So I'm sure they won't mind me saying this either. That India's just chosen that when they go to England in summer, you saw that India's only going to play India A. It's not going to play the county teams because they put up lousy teams, right? So it's sort of, I think that's the sort of team that England played in Sri Lanka. So they should be a bit careful before rejoicing as they're currently doing. India's not going to be the same opposition. Having said that, Dom West wasn't bowling particularly well, because when I saw him bowling, he wasn't getting the drift that he was getting during the summer. But that doesn't mean it can't change in India, because he's a good bowler. Leach, for me, I know the English are much more positive on Leach over Bess. I think Leach is a bit of a poor man's Jadeja.
Interesting.
So unless the pitch does something, he's going to be bowling on a 1 rupee coin day in, day out, right? That's the kind of bowler he is. Is that going to have an impact in India? I think he's got to do better than that, unless the pitches really help him. That's my feeling on Leach. By the way, in their backup squad, I think they have a leg spinner. I really like him. I don't know if they're going to let him play. Matt Parkinson.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen him bowl. His action sort of like a Warney action. So almost sideways. He's pretty good. I think he's like 26, maybe something like that. He's not a terribly young, and he hasn't. I don't think he's played test matches. He's played first class cricket, maybe a couple of ODIs, but he could be it's the same logic, right? I mean, having Kuldeep in there, maybe it's just my bias to spin, but I would have someone like him in there. It's unlikely that he's going to play unless there are injuries or whatever, but he could be something they would want to put into the mix at some point in time.
Very interesting. So I do want to close by asking you really quickly, since you mentioned Jack Leach being a poor man's Jadeja. What, in your opinion, is so Jadeja's not in the squad for this series, as we talked, but Akshar Patel has come in as a like for like. Washington Sundar also did a magnificent job in an all-round capacity in the test he was brought in.
Yep.
What, in your opinion, is the role of a player like a Jadeja or a Sundar in the Indian test squad? Or do you think they have a long-term role, that type of a player has a long-term role in the 11?
I think Jadeja is a very good all-rounder. So if you've got place for an all-rounder, and he's a good spinner. He's turned into a good spinner. He didn't start off being a great spinner, but he's turned into a good spinner. So if you can use him in the middle order and as a spinner, we should definitely take him, right? His batting's come along really, really well. The way I'll put it is, if Hardik Pandya can't play, I'd take Jadeja, right?
Got it. Yeah.
That's, I think, the space for him. Sundar, I find it very difficult to believe he can get into the team, just walk into the team as things stand right now, regardless of how he played in Australia.
But as you said, he's young, right? And
exactly.
So as you think about the spinner,
Ashwin's going to, retire in a few years. So Sundar's only 21 or something. So he's got time.
Okay, Anindya, before we let you go, we always ask our guests on the show to make a prediction. So we have 4 tests coming up, 2 in Chennai, 2 in Ahmedabad. What's your prediction going to be for the India versus England series?
Well, I'd like a 3-1 India.
But you think England will take 1? Yeah, that's interesting.
We are Indian. You've got to be generous to your guests.
So we're giving them 1 test.
No, I think they're a good team. So I'll give them 1.
Okay, so 3-1 here. We'll be tracking. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully, you're either right or you're wrong in the way we go 4-0.
There's no middle path to this one.
Exactly. So, all right, DJ, do you want to quickly wrap us up with telling our listeners about the great book giveaway we have?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, Anindya, thank you so much for writing the great book Wizards, which is all about Indian spin. You've also written Spellbinding Spells. So I wanted to quickly ask you about one incident that you mentioned in your book Wizards, which is about Subhash Gupte bowling in the street. And it's gully cricket that he's bowling in. And of course, Twitter handle is One Tip, One Hand, which is a homage to street cricket, gully cricket. Can you just talk our listeners through that particular paragraph in your book where we talk about him bowling so well in the gully that none of the windows were ever broken in that gully? It's just an amazing incident.
Yeah, it's a story that obviously I have been told, when I was writing the book by Madhav Apte, who sadly passed away now. And so this is near Shivaji Park, where the gully is, where he grew up playing cricket. And he was so accurate that it was impossible for the batsman there to hit him high enough to break windows. So windows never got broken when he was bowling. And that gully, over time, Sandeep Patil played in the same place, so then it got renamed into Sandeep Patil Gully. It used to be named after Gupta at some one point in time.
Yeah, there's just some brilliant anecdotes in this. The other thing that I discovered while reading the book was that Pataudi, the captain that you mentioned, who brought in the spin quartet, actually lost his eye in a car accident. For some reason, I thought he lost his eye in a hunting accident. I don't know why. I've always thought that he lost his eye in a hunting accident.
There's another story on the hunting part. It was more a prank he was playing on the rest of the team when they went to Pataudi for a day. No, what happened was, this is before he played Test cricket. He was at Oxford, and it was just a bizarre accident. They'd gone for dinner. It was 300 yards away, and a friend was driving that way, and he decided to get in with the friend. And they had an accident in that 300 yards. The front windscreen, a piece of glass went into his eye. 6 months later, he was playing for India in the West Indies against Hall and Griffith. I mean, that was Pataudi for you. Someone asked him that, how do you decide? Because obviously when you have one eye, you see multiple balls coming at you. And he said, I just pick the one nearest me.
That's how late he played it. I mean, depth perception must be an absolutely impossible thing for him to do as well. And this book is just full of amazing, great anecdotes, Anindya. And I mean, the Pataudi accident, the summer of 42 we could have called this a summer of 36. Thankfully, we've got much better memories of this. And just a brilliant, brilliant book. So thank you for writing it. And for our listeners who would like to win a copy of this book, please do share the link to the podcast and write into us saying what your favorite spell, and the important thing being spell, of spin bowling is. And Anindya is very keen to... In Indian spin bowling, that is. I mean, of course, we are an Indian cricket podcast. So your favorite spell of Indian spin bowling to stand a chance of winning the book Spin Wizards, A Story of Indian Spin Bowling, written by our guest, Anindya Dutta. Thank you so much for writing that book. It's just absolutely brilliant for you to have documented all of that. I'm really...
Thank you for your appreciation. Really means a lot.
Great. So thank you, DJ. Thank you, Anindya. That brings us to a wrap of this week's episode of Edges and Sledges. We're always excited to hear from you. So send in your messages, your tweets, your stories, comments, questions, everything at One Tip One Hand on all social media platforms. You can email us at contact@onetiponehand.com. Anindya, all the best for an exciting England series. We hope to read lots of great articles, posts, and hopefully your next book as well coming soon.
Well, thank you for that. It's been a pleasure being here. And don't forget to listen to Guerrilla Cricket, where I'll be commentating on that series.
Excellent plug. We're big fans of Guerrilla Cricket. We will all be tuning in as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
"2020 is a difficult year. A global pandemic, protests, elections, recessions. You get the picture. What we need is a space where we can have nuanced discussions about global affairs and foreign policy. That's where I come in. My name is Hamsini Hariharan, and I host the States of Anarchy podcast. Every second Tuesday, I speak to experts in the field of international relations to make a little more sense of the world. So join me on the IVM podcast app, website, or wherever you're listening to me right now.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से. Hi, I am Sadaf.
And I'm Arshit. खाने का इतिहास, economics, policy, psychology, सब है मेन्यू पे.
Only on the Nankali podcast. Every Wednesday, सिर्फ IVM podcast app या वेबसाइट पर, या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने podcast सुनते हो.